So the next thing, we will talk about styling sections. But before that, I realized that I never. One other element that, I mean, this is something you might decide on as you go a little bit further along, but when you're setting the site styles, it's good to consider your button style also. Again, Squarespace have made it quite easy by creating button packs, so you can set the shape. Yeah, you've got a primary, secondary, and tertiary. I like the classic square-edged outline, but you know, some people might want a mix or this underline effect. That would be quite a common choice, so you can have the filled in and the outline, but I personally love just the elegance of an outline button with the square edge. But it depends on the tone. If you want a friendlier, more bubbly kind of feel, you might go for the round. Anyway, that's where you set that. And of course you can have a mix of all the different styles. You can set them individually too. You don't have to go with a button pack. Okay. And so going back to the actual sections and styling those, I've created two sections here. It is good from the get-go to style your footer section or sections. I normally go for a warm or darker footer as a sort of, I often go for a black footer, even if black is not in the rest of the website, almost like a full stop, and just to give the website a little bit of weight. So anyway, I will set that as black for now. I will often add the square logo. Now I've already put that into the library, so we can select it from there. And then you can create your own menu here. Another thing people like to do with the footer is you might have a newsletter sign up here. So in order to do that, we will add a block, and that is called the newsletter block. Of course, it doesn't have to be, you can customize it. Again, one thing I usually do, I find the title of that block superfluous, so I just delete it, and then you have a sleeker newsletter box. But you may want to add a call to action. Such as keep in touch. And you can also style this, you know, it could have a a background color. Or, you know, sometimes this can look really nice just with an image as the background. By the way, in the case of a dark background, I would usually do the icon in white or a paler colour, not necessarily the actual main logo colour. So yeah, sometimes it's nice to add a little bit of interest to that area. So you could add a background image. Now, on the image front, or you could add just a colour, and you could use one of Squarespace's effects just to add a little bit of tonality. And one thing it is worth mentioning, when you are creating these sections, you can set the height, something like that. I would say keep it neat and small. So then you have a little bit of pre-made padding at the top and bottom. Okay, so these, and then another thing that people like to add in the footer, obviously it depends on the website, but something that can be quite nice is, or you might just add this on one page, it might not be site-wide in the footer, but people add their Instagram feed, which is a block. Now there are a few steps involved in setting that up, which we will come back to, but that's something that you can add. Not necessarily a grid of 12 squares. You could have, you know, 6 items across one line. It's not going to let me do that until I've actually connected an Instagram account. But in order to do that, you connect an Instagram account by selecting that. Yeah, usually I would say less is more, but just to give people a sense, and then you could have a little join us on Instagram across there. So going back to the actual sections, again, Squarespace have many options to style their sections, but I'm just going to show you, just going to add a blank section here. And I'm going to keep it white background for simplicity. So if you want a little bit more control over your spacing, I would recommend closing in the gap by clicking on that option in the design settings. Now that will only change for the section you're working on, which is highlighted in blue, and I often close out the padding. I go by clicking that And that's very useful if you want to create a sort of tiling effect. I have it on my own website, I believe. Source. So basically, see that area here where the image is up against the section above. There's no space. And yeah, I often do it on a lot of websites I create where you have this sort of tiled effect. Do I have it anywhere else? Well, I mean, that is the main example, but I'm not sure I have it on. Oh, I have it in the project gallery. So you will see basically here, tile, image. Yeah, to create a sort of grid effect. So you would do that by, as I said, closing in the gaps, closing out the padding. Always best to, I mean, unless you want an actual border, because that will give you a border, but I usually set that to 0. It always defaults back to 1, so sometimes you have to check that. So we'll add an image. Because this is just an imaginary restaurant I made up earlier, we will browse stock images. So Squarespace, link in with 2 libraries. You have free images from Unsplash or premium from Getty. Now, I would generally say I would only use either of these resources when you're planning out your website. If you're actually going to use one of these images, I would go and download or license them directly from the library, because when you just use the Squarespace integration, you don't really get much control over the resolution, and even if you pay to license it through Getty, you don't have the original file to use for your marketing materials, etc. So most of the images that you find in the premium library you can also download from iStock, I'm pretty sure. So let me, but as a placeholder, you know, these integrations are very, very useful. So let's just let's just use that for now. Now, when you're doing this tiling effect, it's very important to make sure that you fill the image frame. You always get a choice to fit it to keep the original shape, but you want to fill it to have this effect. Okay, so we have that. We've pulled that into the center, and we'll give our tile a little bit of a title. So we'll just call it from farm to table. I know I'm not being very original here, and we'll give it possibly a heading too. And then your little description. I would usually use paragraph 2 for the descriptions. So that's how you would do that. And then if you wanted to do, say, 3 tiled sections, I would normally duplicate this and have that as your 3rd section, and duplicate this and obviously add a contrasting color setting. And you can then just drag the image across. Okay, so we would have anyway, that's how I would do that. Obviously with different sections, and these could be lead-ins, you know, to other areas of the website. So you could add a button. Okay, it's not wanting to cooperate right now, but basically that's the idea. So you could say something like view menus, or discover more, visit our farm, you know. So these are just points of interest for people to go off and discover. So that's about tiling sections. And then I'll show you how to add a background image or video. So we'll add another blank section. And we'll add another image. I mean, if you have a video, that's great to add some movement. But again, we'll use our stock image library, and I'll just put Greece. Or I'm thinking possibly a farm, maybe. Obviously, you'll have all of this worked out before, but anyway, you want to have something kind of enticing, but and if you're not adding a now you could have like a little bit of intro, you know, sourced from the earth, but if you wanted to add a description or wording here, it's very important to set the color to the darkest, and you can then set the opacity. You don't want to go too dark, but you want to go dark enough so you can pop, so the words pop. And a lot of people add like an image effect here. This is parallax. That's the most common, probably the most classic way. I mean, Squarespace have introduced these other effects, but this is what gives your website a little bit of a 3D effect. The way it'll show up better when I exit the editor. So that will see the way it slides up. I mean, that's quite a beautiful effect. And that you know, I think in this digital world, it's very important to transport people to another world, give them a sense, almost an immersive experience, you know. You know, in this case, it might make more sense to have that image underneath these sections. But yeah, they're the most important points to know about styling sections. Of course, you can have much sparser sections, you know, like you know, you don't have to tile it out, or you could So that is, you can do a collage effect, and I'll also show you how to create this effect with the sections if you want to change the divider shape.